A sub-Saharan African seduction. Africa is attracting ever more interest from powers elsewhere, says The Economist. Very big article, really interesting. Graham Greene, who's a great writer, chronicler of hazy entrepots, would have loved Djibouti. A third of global shipping streams by this little bit of northeast Africa. All the world, it seems, is crammed together in its capital. French, Italian, Japanese military bases, Camp Lemonnier, America's only permanent military base in Africa. China's first such base is a little to the northwest of it. Indian and British embassies will soon open. Within weeks, the Turkey Diyanet Foundation will open the largest mosque in East Africa in the city. The muezzin will struggle to be heard amid the roar of fighter jets overhead, writes The Economist. Djibouti is small, but it boasts a multi-purpose port, a railway to Ethiopia, and the beginnings of a free trade zone, which once finished will be the largest in Africa. They were all built by Chinese state-owned firms and are at least partly run by them. According to McKinsey, a management consultancy, there are now 10,000 Chinese businesses on the African continent. Alex Vines of Chatham House, a think tank in London, talks of a new scramble for Africa. According to the Diplometrics project at the University of Denver, more than 320 embassies or consulates were opened in Africa between 2010 and 2016. Turkey alone opened 26. The boom continues. Last year, India announced it would open 18 more. This year, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, is set to host the first Russia-Africa summit, a tribute act to the Triennial Forum on Africa-China cooperation. Chinese top officials made 79 visits to Africa in the decade up to 2018. Since 2008, Turkey's leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan has paid more than 30 visits to African countries, most of them sub-Saharan. Macron has visited the continent 9 times since becoming president in 2017. Modi has visited 8 African countries during his 5 years in power in India, but not all are so keen. Kanye West and Kim Kardashian have visited more African leaders than has Mr. Trump, who has yet to set foot on the continent. Such visits and summits are in part efforts to make use of Africa's diplomatic clout. This is important. Its 54 nations make up more than a quarter of the UN General Assembly. The Horn of Africa has become part of the broader competition between Saudi Arabia, the UAE on one side, and Iran, Qatar, and Turkey on the other. China's military influence stretches well beyond the base in Djibouti. Last year, the People's Liberation Army conducted exercises in Cameroon, Gabon, Ghana, and Nigeria. China sells more weapons in sub-Saharan Africa than any other nation. It has accounted for 27% of the region's arms imports in 2013 to 2017. It wants to protect trade. In Beijing, East Africa is counted as part of the Maritime Silk Road. There are more than 1 million Chinese living in Africa who may need protection too. During the Libyan Revolution of 2011, a Chinese naval vessel helped in the evacuation of thousands of Chinese contractors from the country. Russia's moves are more muscular, more mercenary. Often the key figures are cronies of Mr. Putin, like Yevgeny Prigozhin, a former chef, rather than official state employees. Mr. Vines likens them to Cecil Rhodes and other 19th century imperialists who would lead private invasions with the implicit protection of the government back home. Though its role in the CAR is the most high profile, Russia has been intensifying its links across Africa. At least 250,000 Africans were trained in or by the Soviet Union before its demise in 1991. America's relative economic importance is waning. In 2006, America, China, and France were the 3 countries doing the most trade with sub-Saharan Africa, defined as the sum of imports and exports. From 2006 to 2018, Chinese trade increased by 226%, and India's by 292%. Turkey, 216%, Russia, 335%, Indonesia, 224%. The EU, still all told the region's largest trading partner, managed only a modest 41%. American trade with sub-Saharan Africa shrank. Other countries see Africa as a customer for excess capacity. China, which has run up huge stockpiles, sold more than 781,000 tons of rice to African countries in 2017, more than 10 times the amount in 2016, with Ivory Coast overtaking South Korea as the biggest importer. Turkish Airlines, which is 49% state-owned, flies to more than 50 African cities. Others are thus positioned to take up some slack as China recalibrates its approach to the continent to make it less expensive. They're to write off $1 billion in losses on the railway from Djibouti to Ethiopia after fewer passengers turned up than expected. Xi, of course, warned against state-backed investments which amount to vanity projects. On average, 32% of African external public debt is owed to private lenders, 35% to multilateral institutions such as the World Bank. China is the biggest bilateral lender, but its loans are just 20% of the total. Criticism of some loans seems amply justified. In Kenya, local journalists have been probing the terms of the $3.2 billion railway between Nairobi and Mombasa, with worries that Mombasa's port may be pledged as collateral. Ultimately, the debt problem is an African problem, says Anzetse Were, but China is finally getting some pushback, saying that the West has a long history of supporting its preferred strongmen on the continent, and this is short-sighted. I can't agree more. If African countries need more extra choices over whom they strike deals with, they need the power to choose their politicians too.